Hi, everyone. All right. Thank you so much to the association and NIS for organizing this forum. I've learned so much from all of you experts already. And thank you also to the fabulous interpreters who have been doing great translations, I think for my benefit more than anybody's. For those who are still feeling a little tired after lunch, I thought we could just start with a quick video. Hopefully the sound will work.
Hi, everyone. It's me, Tom Cruise, the actor. But hardly anyone knows that for a long time I had my heart set on a career in sports that might have become serious if not for the severe knee injury. I believe it's my ardent love for sport that makes me so good in action movies. That's why watching how the corrupt officials who seized the sport Olympus are gradually turning one of the greatest passions of my life into an instrument for siphoning off money is beyond bearable. In this series, you will discover the inner workings of the global sports industry. In particular, I will shed some light on the venal executives of the International Olympic Committee, IOC, who are slowly and painfully destroying the Olympic sports that have existed for thousands of years.
Okay, I don't know if that was translated, but you got maybe the gist of this. So raise your hand if you think this is a new documentary from Tom Cruise published on Netflix. Okay. Now, raise your hand if you think this is a video that uses AI audio created by a Russian threat actor and distributed on Telegram in a fake domain ahead of the Paris Olympics this summer. Correct. Okay, so you guys are all correct. This is kind of a goofy example. This video was created by a Russian influence actor that our group at Microsoft is tracking as Storm 1679. Storm 1679, their main calling card when it comes to influence operations is to create spoofing videos. They often use some sort of modifications using AI in their videos. It's a really well-resourced actor. We know that it gets money, and this really illustrates kind of Russia's evolving style when it comes to disinformation online. So my team, we are the Microsoft Threat Analysis Center, which is the group at the top there, circled in yellow. Our mission is to detect and assess and disrupt influence threats, both to Microsoft, its customers, and to democracies around the world. So for the flow of today's brief, I thought I would first introduce sort of MTAC, sort of the various environment that we work in, introduce some of the frameworks that we use to detect influence operations, and then dive into a couple of case studies, first starting with Russia, then China, and then Iran, which will hopefully show new tactics used by these influence actors to raise awareness about why we should be considering influence operations when it comes to cybersecurity. So at MTAG, we use all open source information. We use technical, behavioral, and contextual evidence to back up our findings, and all of us come with a background in geopolitics and language ability of some kind. But at MTAC, we're just one part of Microsoft's larger ecosystem. We work most often with the Microsoft Threat Intelligence Center, also called Mystic, which you see on the bottom. A good way to think about how we collaborate is that Mystic, they're the ones kind of finding the cyber actors, and at MTAC, we're the ones finding the influence actors. So if we think about a hack and leak operation, for instance, Mystic, they will find the hackers, and at MTAC, we'll find the leak. We also work a lot with the AI for Good Lab. They help us evaluate the impact of some of the influence operations that we see. And then also we work with the Digital Crimes Unit in terms of responding and actioning some of these influence operations. So the first framework that I wanted to talk about is audience spaces. Right, so I think we heard this at an earlier panel, but in the information space, there are no country borders. Instead, the information space, it's made up of these audience spaces, right? So audiences, the way we look at it, they really are defined by two main factors, platform and language. So the most sophisticated influence actors, they will be working to target all four of these audience spaces. So to use Russia as an example, we can start on the farthest most left audience space there, audience in autocracy. This would be, Russian influence actors messaging in Russian on Russian platforms, right? So that's happening within their own audience space. The diaspora, this is often the leading edge when it comes to how, malign actors are conducting influence operations. So this would be, Russian language messaging on a mixture of both Russian platforms, but also some international platforms as well. Moving all the way to the, far most right side, audience and democracy, this would be Russian influence actors messaging in multi-different languages on international platforms, right? So they're really kind of disguising the origins of those operations. So when I talk about influence actors, the term that we prefer to use is advanced persistent manipulators, or APMs. APMs are a lot like advanced persistent threats, or APTs, but these are in the influence realm. So instead of APTs, which will conduct destructive cyber attacks, APMs, they're more focused on influencing narratives, influencing perceptions, influencing those audience spaces like we just talked about. We track a whole variety of different APMs. Some of those APMs, they are well-resourced, they have lots of money. Sometimes they work together, sometimes they work alone, but really what kind of unites them is staying committed to their objectives over time. This is a look at some of the objectives that APMs have, the methods that they use to achieve those objectives, and sort of what type of actor we can think of when it comes to an APM. So I already kind of touched on the objectives, right? It's to influence. When it comes to methods, APMs can utilize a whole variety of different methods, right? We have things like creating forgeries, employing computational propaganda, staging real-world events. These are all different types of methods that APMs will use. The most advanced APMs are the ones that would operate at this bottom level of the chart, right? So, China and Russia both come to mind when we think of their ability to distort reality, which is kind of the highest level objective. So just a quick note on sort of the terminology that I'll be using as well. At Microsoft, we use a weather-themed terminology to discuss APMs and APTs. So I'll be talking a lot about what we call a flood. Floods are the actors that are conducting influence operations. So these are our APMs. I'll also be talking a lot about storms. A storm is a group that is an emerging threat. It hasn't been fully developed, or maybe we're still working on attribution. That's a storm. And then you can see some of the more traditional APTs on there as well. Blizzard, typhoon, sandstorm, these refer to Russia-based, China-based, and Iran-based APTs, or cyber threat groups. And this is just the last framework I wanted to talk about before jumping into some of our case studies. So this chart is a way for us to try to think about measuring the sophistication and the impact of some of these influence operations. So sophistication, that is on the horizontal axis there. Sophistication is sort of best understood in terms of a variety of different tactics, techniques, and procedures used by these groups. So our analysts, we analyzed about 81 different tactics that we see a bunch of different APMs using, and then organized, some of these main influence actors based on what tactics those are. So things like, using various technologies, using generative AI, the number of accounts, deployed, things like that. And then on the vertical axis, this is impact. Impact is definitely the hardest thing to measure. It's the hardest thing to quantify. We have this split into the digital world and the physical world, these 6 categories. And the ones that are the most impactful influence actors are the ones that are really able to jump from the digital world into that physical world, right? So you have things like incite. So is the actor able to incite violence or incite fear, whether it's real or imagined? Are they able to impede processes? Are they able to impede elections or, democratic processes, things like that? And then that topmost category, distort, are they able to distort reality? So I already talked about Storm 1679. That was the Tom Cruise documentary. So I wanted to talk about a different, pretty visible and well-known Russian APM that we call Ruza Flood. Ruza Flood is also commonly known as doppelganger. It gets its name because it creates lots of different doppelganger or spoof websites that are meant to look like trusted international websites around the world. So what is this influence actor's objective? It's to undermine support for Ukraine around the world, but it does come with a lot of narrative flexibility when it comes to which target audience it's trying to reach. So MTAC, we've been tracking this group for a number of different, over the course of a couple of years. And recent disclosures from the FBI have helped us confirm some of the attribution and assessments that we've made. So there are kind of three important things that I want you to take away about Ruza Flood. So the first one is that Ruza Flood comes with an entire office that is dedicated purely on making spoofed content of literally all kinds. So you can see the spoofing websites, but there's also fake social media accounts and fake cartoons and things like that. Our team is tracking up to 52 different fake websites that this actor is creating. The second thing I want you to take away is that this actor is really good at merging that digital to physical world. So a lot of these efforts are actually going hand in hand with efforts to co-opt politicians around the world. Sometimes the objective is to create political movements or to create protests. So this is a really impactful measure. And then the third thing I want you to take away is sort of, what's going on, beyond the surface of all of this. So an interesting thing about Ruza Flood is that it's directed at the highest levels of Russian government. It's directed by an office within Russia's presidential administration that previously was in charge of creating Russia's domestic internet environment. So this office, it actually hadn't done anything regarding foreign malign influence until after the start of the Ukraine war. So that kind of speaks to a really interesting change in priorities, right? This really top-level office, the head of it is potentially, thought to be Putin's successor one day, right? This office has now switched to do foreign malign influence targeting a global audience. So this kind of speaks to the different priorities potentially going on in the ecosystem. And although the FBI has recently actioned some of the websites, so at least within US jurisdiction, you cannot access some of these websites anymore, Ruza Flood continues to evolve. We think that the content and the office still exists, but likely they will try to hide their footprint and skirt away and still create content. So now I want to move on to two quick case studies to talk about PRC influence. So when it comes to PRC influence, China is really good at centralizing messaging and large-scale amplification, right? We see volume and just massive amounts of content when it comes to Chinese online influence. Over the past few years or so, our team has been covering an actor which we call Tides of Flood. This actor is probably better known as Spamiflage. It's China's main online social media disinformation actor. We're tracking this actor on over 175 websites, I think, 58 different languages, 18,000 accounts. So this is truly a massive, massive actor. Over the past year, this actor has also begun to successfully impersonate US voters. So this is something that we've been looking at very carefully ahead of the US presidential election. Recent public reporting has actually taken down a small portion of this network, but out of all the various campaigns we've seen from this actor, this specific set of accounts that are focused on really impersonating US voters, this has been their most successful. They're really trying to engage with voters by posing, provocative questions online, using short-form video to get lots of views, and we've seen pick up, real-life politicians repost some of this content as well. And so, why should we care about this at all? This would be the first time that we've seen the PRC successfully conduct an English language campaign. We've seen them in the past try to do so in other contexts, but it hasn't worked quite as well. So this is a really interesting development. These accounts also show a better understanding about localization of culture and using the right memes and using the right hashtags, and that's something newly developed that we've seen with this actor. Another campaign that really speaks to the breadth of Chinese influence operations is this group of websites that we track as Storm 1392. So this group of websites, there are about 55 in this network. They're all Chinese language, and they aim to target the Chinese diaspora around the world. Many of these websites, they present themselves as being independent, unaffiliated, and uncoordinated with one another. But our team has been able to assess with high confidence that this group of websites is actually run by the CCP's United Front Work Department, or at least they offer technology and money to some of these websites. Our team, we looked at passive DNS data, technical indicators, website registration information, and analyzed content across 1 million different news articles. And so although these websites do not exclusively peddle disinformation, when it comes to topics that are especially sensitive for the Chinese government, they will 100% sort of parrot or just copy, the Chinese government's line. And so, why does this matter and why should we care about it? This campaign just really speaks to, the extent to which the PRC government has been able to permeate the Chinese language news media environment, allowing the drowning out of sensitive subjects. And then I just finally wanted to turn to 2 case studies as they pertain to Iranian influence. So out of the 3 nation states that I've talked about, Iran is really most adept when it comes to using a blend of both cyber and influence actors, right? So this type of actor is really favored by the Iranian regime. So this would be something like an actor would conduct sort of a low-grade cyber attack, but then use its influence arm of that actor to say that the attack was actually much bigger than it actually was. So this is what we think of in terms of cyber-enabled influence. So after the October 7th attack in Israel, our team tracked just an explosion of Iranian cyber-enabled influence. Some of these groups our team has been tracking since early 2020, and this was the most activity they'd seen of all time. So the way that the time period directly after October 7th proceeded was that there were kind of 3 main phases to some of these cyber-enabled influence campaigns. The first stage was Iranian groups reacted just really quickly to the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas war. They repurposed old assets that they hadn't used in a while and then deployed them for the purposes of this influence campaign. In the second stage, these groups then deployed more destructive cyber attacks. So we saw new targets, we saw more coordination. Some of these attacks also included ransomware, IoT manipulation, things like that. And then in the third phase, we saw Iran actors extend their influence efforts beyond Israel's borders and to target countries that were supporting Israel in the hopes of, weakening international backing for Israel. And then this is my last case study. This is a little bit different from Iran than we've seen previously. So when it comes to the use of technology, particularly generative AI, Iran definitely lags behind Russia and particularly lags behind China. But this was a really interesting case study of Iran actually just using off-the-shelf technology. So our team, we identified a network of about a dozen Iranian-operated WordPress news sites. These sites were publishing content in English, Arabic, French, and Spanish. They aimed to create a lot of narratives that were supposed to be divisive ahead, again, of the U.S. elections. They posed as both liberal and also conservative accounts. So our team, we were able to see that these websites were actually using generative AI. So basically, Iranian actors were taking content from real news sites, putting them into ChatGPT in this case, and asking ChatGPT to rewrite the article. They then used that content, uploaded it onto these news sites, and then they had, brand new content that, would avoid copyright issues. It would avoid, search engine optimization, dinging, things like that. And it allowed them to just cut down on time. They were able to create, these websites extremely quickly, as well as have them be inauthentically amplified on social media as well. However, we were able to work with OpenAI, who has since disabled their accounts, but it's likely as generative AI tools become more accessible, we'll likely see a similar use case from Iranian actors, but also from lots of other APMs across the world as well. And that's all I have today. Thank you.